Good morning, everybody. We are ready to continue on in our study of the earliest Americans. We started last week with chapter 1, and we talked about how the earliest Americans crossed the frozen land bridge between Siberia, which is in the USSR, well, which was the USSR, sorry, that really dates me, which is in Russia. Wow. In the continent of Asia, and they crossed to North America to the shores of Alaska, which is technically part of the United States. It's way north up by Canada, but you guys know where it is. First, before we start, I want to read you a little bit of background information about chapter 2 before we actually start chapter 2, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the climate and the distance and the way of life of the earliest Americans. This is the chapter 2 background. It is not for you to follow. There is no PDF file for you. As the Ice Age warmed, the hunters who were now in North America followed their prey. They moved south through Western Canada, the Rockies, Mexico, Central America, and eventually by 10,500 BCE, all the way to the southern end of South America. Let me show you on a globe. So they started out, there it is. Let me get this at a better angle so it's not glaring. They started out here in Siberia, which is in Asia. They crossed Beringia, the land bridge, into Alaska. And they went from Alaska to Canada and down. I mean, I don't know if I'm on the Rocky Mountains, but it's here somewhere in the western United States. Let me get to the other side because now I got to slide my finger down. I just lost my place. Okay, here we go. It's hard to do a globe because the globe is round, but I want you to see. You know what? I'm going to use the map. That's flat. I won't have to struggle with it so much. It's just a little easier, I think, to see the globe because it can be a lot closer. Tilt it up just a smidge. Okay, so they started here. Get my little finger. Okay, I got the finger. They started here. I've lost my place. Here, I'm going to go over here to the other side of the map, which is why I was using the globe because it's a circle. So they started right here in Russia, Siberia, in the northern part of Siberia, and they crossed the Bering Strait. The Bering Strait was frozen at that time, and it was not underwater. And it was called Beringia, the land bridge. And it looks here, you look and you say, well, that wasn't very far, but it was about 55 miles or about 88 kilometers. To put that into perspective, let's pretend that you had to walk to Fayetteville and then all the way back. Because the distance from Bentonville to Fayetteville is give or take, I don't know, 28 miles, 26 miles, something like that, give or take, something right around there. It's less than 30 miles, but more than 25. So you walk all the way to Fayetteville and then you walk all the way back. And you think, well, that's not such a big deal. Well, imagine that the temperatures were freezing. Remember, this was a frozen land bridge. Here, where's that line? Here is the Arctic Circle. You were on the Arctic Circle. So it's super cold. You're carrying a bunch of hunting gear with you if you are one of the hunters, and you are carrying if you're one of the women who was not hunting, then you would, and they were moving as they were migrating, you would be carrying packs of things that were like your household goods and your tent, for lack of a better word. So you were carrying all of that equipment on your back. It was really, really cold, and you have to walk all the way to Fayetteville and back just across the land bridge. Then, as this land bridge melted, as the ice age began to melt and the land bridge became covered with water, they continued their migration. They migrated here through Alaska, down through Canada, following the Rocky Mountains, staying always to the west of the Rocky Mountains because they didn't cross them. Down, down, down into the United States, down into Mexico. Now we're no longer in the Rocky Mountains. They also continued to migrate to Central America and even into South America. They migrated all the way down to the southern tip of South America, down here by Cape Horn. That was the migration of the earliest Americans. Some of the groups branched east until over time people reached the east coast of North America. So some of them, they started out here. Many of them continued the southern descent because they couldn't cross the Rocky Mountains, but then some of them began the migration across the Rocky Mountains, and eventually they populated all of the United States, reaching the eastern coast of the United States, as they did in all of the other continents as well. And they also says they went to the rainforest of Brazil, and as you can see, that's all the way over here. So as I said, they continued south, but they also some branches of them continued to move east as well till they populated all of North and South and Central America. All along the way, some of the groups dropped out of the wandering and they stayed in places that seemed hospitable. That means places that were easy to farm and they had a lot of prey. I mean, prey for them to hunt so that they didn't have to worry about starving. And it's important to remember that this movement, it didn't just take place one day. People said, oh, let's cross Beringia and head south. No, this took place over thousands and thousands of years. So gradually the migration occurred. It wasn't a rapid migration. As the ice disappeared, so did the prehistoric animals that the hunters relied on for their food, for their clothing, and for their shelter. The animals may have died out because of the changes in temperatures or because the hunters killed too many of the mammoths, mastodons, and other large animals. The lack of these animals may be one reason that the groups continued to move on. They were looking for the ever scarcer big animals to hunt because we know there were no mastodons down in South America. To make up for the lack of the big game, hunters turned to smaller game, such as deer and rabbits, for their food. People also began to pick wild plants, nuts, seeds, and berries, and to dig up roots to eat. It is probable that people were gathering wild foods as early as 15,000 BCE. Even when people hunted, it is also likely that they gathered other types of food, depending on the availability, because man does not live by meat alone. And early man did not live by meat alone. They also had plants. Early people in the Americas, like people in the Middle East in ancient time, noticed that as they foraged for food, some plants grew better than others. Some people reasoned that if they planted the seeds of these plants, they could get more food and get it more easily by wandering over miles of land looking for berries and plants to pick. This process of planting and harvesting wild plants for people to eat is called domestication. With the domestication of the plants, the development of farming ensured a steady supply for those cultures that adopted farming. The most obvious benefit of a steady source of food was that people no longer had to search for food. Because farming required staying in one place, settlements of a few families grew in size as the population grew. With a steady diet and much better food, people were living longer and having more children. Once a number of people were gathered in one place, some form of authority was needed to organize them for the public good and to keep order. This was the beginning of government. However, even those who were nomads or semi nomadic hunters had some form of organization that ensured order within the group, because order within a group is really important. You cannot have everyone in the group doing as they please. That's called anarchy, and it doesn't work. Because at that point, people are saying, well, this is what I want to do. You do you, and I'll do me, and the laws don't apply. Well, that's not the way that it worked, and that form of self-government does not work. And that's why they would have some form of organization to ensure the the protection of the group members, but also to ensure that the group would continue on and would continue to thrive with some sort of order. Whether a chief and advisors ruled a city state of 10,000 people, as in the Aztec city state, or an extended family of 30 with the tribes of the Great Basin, someone decided what was going to be done and who was going to do it, and they made certain that everybody did what he or she was supposed to do. The development of Native American culture in North America is somewhat different from what occurred in Mexico and Central and South America. While some groups, such as the Anasazi in what is today the southwestern United States, the Mississippian culture of the Southeast, and the Northeast Woodlands people both hunted and farmed. Many North American Native people remained mainly hunters. Some also participated in widespread trading networks. As groups dropped out of the general migration and adapted to the environments in which they had chosen to settle, they began to develop their own language. A fundamental change was in the words that were necessary and important to the different groups. For example, people who became farmers would need a large vocabulary that referred to crops and tools and basically the growing process in itself, while those who remained hunters might develop more words relating to the hunt, to animals that they killed and the uses that they made, such as their food and clothing and the teepee coverings. So that is how the language of the earliest Americans changed. It changed as people migrated and people then decided to settle in certain settlements, and the rest of the people moved on. Those people that settled in the little settlements, they would develop sort of a language of their own. Think of it like this. If you travel the United States, let's say you try to hit all 50 United States. Everywhere that you go, certain regions of the United States have certain words or phrases that they use that are unique to that region. For example, I am not from the South. Right, you couldn't tell, right, because of my accent. But something that we say in the Midwest that they don't really say anywhere else, except in a sort of distorted form in the East, and I'll tell you about that in a second, is you guys. We say you guys, and what we mean is everybody. If I was in the eastern part of the United States, like New York, New Jersey, that area, I wouldn't say you guys. I would say use guys. Use guys means the same thing. If I was in the South, I wouldn't say you guys or use guys. I would say y'all, y'all. It means the same thing. Those are sort of let's say, distortions of the language that have developed over time and that are used in certain regions or certain areas of the United States. And that's just one example. There are many, many examples. Another great one is the word that is used for that carbonated beverage that comes in a can or a bottle and has lots of corn syrup and sugar in it and artificial coloring and caffeine. In the North, we call it pop. That's what it's called. In the South, it's called soda. If I were to talk about pop as I did when I first moved to the South, people did not know what I was talking about. But if you go north and you talk about soda, they're going to give you a club soda, which is basically carbonated water, because that's what soda means in the north. So those are the types of things that have changed slightly. And that's the kind of language that we're talking about. That is how the different tribes, shall we say, let's just call them tribes, or the different groups of people, they weren't technically tribes at that time. The different groups of people, they would develop their own language of a sort. They would still have a lot of shared language with the people who migrated on, but they would, as they settled, they would come include words that were more important to their particular culture. And some of the words that they shared with this group of migrating people may change just slightly over time. Okay. All of that background information to remind you how people reached North America. Do you remember how they reached North America? They did. They crossed Beringia, the land bridge. It was not underwater, it was frozen, and it was the water had receded because of all of the frozen land around it. So the water levels were very low. So they walked right across from Siberia in Russia, in the continent of Asia, right across to the continent of North America to Alaska. How did they get food? They hunted. They were hunter gatherers. So they hunted for the game, for the big game, mostly for the mastodons, the woolly mammoths, and the muskox. Is that right? Muskox. Now I'm forgetting what was that other big game animal. I think it was a musk ox. Oh, it doesn't say. I'm pretty sure that it was musk ox that we talked about. Um, I lost my train of thought. Oh, that's how they got their food. They hunted those big game animals, and they also gathered what little food that they could find. Because as they followed the animals would go to where there was food. So that means that there was green grass and plants and such growing somewhere. And that's where those animals would migrate. And the hunter gatherers would follow those animals as they migrated. Okay, let me find. Oh, there's my book. If you're following along in the earliest reader in the physical copy of this book, we are going to be on page 10, which is the beginning of chapter 2, I hope. It is America's First Settlers. If you're following along in the PDF file, look for the chapter or the section entitled America's First Settlers. Okay. More than 15,000 years ago, Ice Age hunters in Beringia, like the ones in the story, were moving into North America. But many scientists believe that earlier people may have arrived 30,000 years ago by sea along the Pacific coast. So there is dispute as to how the first Americans arrived. There is dispute as to that. At that time, hunter gatherers could not move very far into North America. Huge sheets of ice blocked the way. About 14,000 years ago, the ice sheets began to melt, and the Ice Age was ending. Hunters could now follow the herds of animals farther and farther into North America. First, they spread across most of what is now Alaska, and then they moved south through what is now Western Canada. Remember, they stayed to the west of the Rocky Mountains at that time. Between 9,000 and 15,000 years ago, groups of hunter gatherers spread out through the New World. Little by little, they moved into the ice free parts of North America. They walked everywhere and traveled all the way to the South American tip. Okay, if you look here at this page, let me make sure you can see it. There you go. There are different types of homes that were used, and it depended on the climate. So it really depended on the climate as to what type of home that they lived in. The farther north that they were, you can see, I'm going to come to the side. This is the eastern part of the United States. That's what they're using as a depiction. This is Florida. We all know that Florida stays warm most of the time. So they lived in more of the grassy hut type of a situation. And we can, as we move north, we can see that the houses get more substantial, and mostly that is due to the fact that they didn't want to be cold. So as you move further north, you will see that the houses became more substantial. The distance, I just want to make sure, let me look this up really quick. I forgot to look this number up. But I just want to make sure that you understand distance between Alaska, and what did I say? Cape Cod? Nope, that wasn't it. Cape Horn. Sorry, Cape Horn. I want to make sure that you understand the huge distance that these people covered. And it was all on foot. From Alaska to Cape Horn is 9,357 miles. And that's as the crow flies. So what they're showing me on my map on my screen, which you can't see, is that from Alaska to Cape Horn, which is here, they're doing this, a straight line. That's 9,000, whatever I said, 9,500, 9,357 miles. However, that's not what the earliest migration was. The earliest Americans, they migrated like this, and then down here, and then here. So as they migrated, we know that it was not just 9,000 miles. It was probably closer to about 15,000 miles that they covered, all of it on foot. They only walked because that's all that they had. So it's a very, very long way. We are now on page 12, A New World to Live in. By now, the climate was getting much warmer. Water ran off from the melting ice sheets, carving out giant river valleys. North America's huge Great Lakes filled up. Melting ice water caused the oceans all over the earth to rise. Many areas along the coast were flooded, including Beringia. The rising sea cut North America off from Asia. A river valley is an area of low land surrounded by mountains and hills, and it often has a river running through it. It is similar to a fjord, but it's not exactly the same. But it is similar. The various groups of people found two vast continents to live in and all the animals that they could hunt. They continued to hunt large animals such as mastodon. A mastodon is a large prehistoric animal like an elephant and a mammoth. It's very similar to those two. Over time, the climate changed, and this caused many of the mammals to die out. The change in climate destroyed many of the plants that the mammals ate. Overhunting the mastodon also helped to reduce its numbers. Thousands of years passed, and groups of people moved from one place to another. As they moved, they learned to live in their new homes. They learned to use their resources that were available to them. They developed hundreds of languages. Like I said, most of them were started out with the same language, but as they settled and and needed new words to describe where they were living and what they were doing, new words would come into their language, and eventually their language would change. But it all had the same base. It all started with the same base. Their ways of life changed to fit the different parts of North and South America where they lived. Today, we consider all of these people Native Americans. About 7,000 years ago, people in Mexico discovered how to plant and raise corn. Slowly, many other Native Americans began to grow their food. For many groups, the ability to grow food meant that they could stay in one place for long periods of time. In some cases, they stayed in one place permanently. And in other areas, however, the climate or the soil was not good for farming. So in those places, the Native Americans remain hunter-gatherers. Think of the United States. Here's a picture of the them planting corn. Think about the United States. There are areas in the United States where you simply cannot plant a garden and expect it to to grow. Think about the deserts in New Mexico and the deserts in West Texas. Those are not places where you're going to naturally where crops are going to grow well. But think about the vast area of land in the Mississippi Delta. Remember when we talked about the Nile River? And we talked about how the shores of the Nile River, due to the flooding and receding and flooding and receding, had these huge um, silt deposits were put in the basin as it was the basin as it's called of the Nile River, and these were great areas for planting. The same thing is true in the United States along the Mississippi coast. As it floods and recedes, that area right along the Mississippi coast, the soil is very rich in that area, and growing plants there is really easy to grow. Almost anything will grow. Another place where plants grow very easily is along the shores, especially the Gulf Shore, because the sandy soil is very conducive to grow crops. And then there's other places where the soil is like a clay, and the clay basically is crushing the roots as the plants are trying to grow. Plants do not grow very well there. And also, as I said, in desert areas where there is not much rainfall, then if there's not enough precipitation, then plants cannot grow there either. All right, let's go ahead and look at some of the questions that I have for you. Who were the first Americans? They were Asians, essentially. People from Asia came across Beringia, across that land bridge, into North America, into Alaska, which is technically North America, and they settled there. That was before the Vikings, before Leif Erikson discovered Vinland, Finland, Vineland, Newfoundland, whatever you want to call it. What happened that allowed the people of Beringia to go farther into North America? Yeah, the Ice Age ended, and the sheets of ice that were blocking the way began to melt, and the ice receded. And as the ice receded, they followed the receding ice farther into North America. How did the climate change help kill off the larger animals? Well, a changing climate means the climate changes not just for the people, but it also changes for the vegetation, for the plants that are there. Some plants need a certain climate to survive. Some are more hardy and can survive pretty much anywhere. But as the climate changed, a lot of those plants that the large animals ate died off. And so the animals had nothing to eat and they starved. And another theory is that the earliest Americans actually overhunted the mastodon, and that eventually killed them off too. Why did the first Americans change their ways of life as they traveled across North and South America? Why did they change their ways of life? Well, some of them decided that the places that they were going through, hey, this looks like a pretty good place to settle. We could probably grow crops here. So they decided that they would settle, and instead of being hunter gatherers and a a migrating, very mobile group of people, they decided that they would settle in one place and they would stay put. That's how they changed. What important discovery did the people in Mexico make about 7,000 years ago? Very important to us because Americans eat a lot of this. Corn. They discovered that they could plant and raise corn quite easily, and so they did. Corn is an amazing thing. Okay, in your Bright Thinker, I have added a link, and it is a link to Paleo Indian Way of Life website. It is totally optional, but it is really cool. So if you want to click on that link, you can go through, and as you move through the website, you can explore different things about the Paleo Indian way of life, how they lived, what they hunted, what crops that they grew, just all kinds of things about them. And it's really a cool website. So up to you, totally optional. If you were in the classroom, we would be exploring it together as a class. But since you're on your own, it's something you can do on your own. You guys have a great day, and I'll be back tomorrow as we take notes on chapter 2. Bye.